Welcome to another episode of our video series of the mechanics of human cognition.
It's great to be back. Hope you've had a good week.
It's been absolutely slammed, but, in a good way. And a funny thing happened while I was going over the sources for today.
Oh, yeah.
I was prepping all this material on philosophy, cognition, social governance. And my music shuffles to this instrumental track by Liquid Tension Experiment. The title was The Freedom of Speech.
Huh. That's quite a coincidence.
It was perfect. No words, just this intense, complex music. And it just hit me that that's the fundamental question we're trying to tackle today, isn't it? Should there be limits on freedom of expression?
It's arguably one of the most critical questions of our time, both cognitively and socially. And to answer it, we can't just talk about laws or politics.
No, you have to go deeper.
You have to start with the cognitive mechanics. So our mission today, really, is to define what freedom and expression even mean so we can understand the boundaries that are, sort of built into the human mind itself.
The internal mechanism that decides if we should speak at all.
Exactly.
Okay, let's start there then. Let's unpack the basics. We usually define freedom of expression as, the liberty to share your beliefs, your opinions.
Is it the standard definition?
But the sources we looked at add a really crucial prerequisite. They basically say you can only demand freedom of expression if you have something worthy of being expressed.
That's it. The cognitive input has to justify the verbal output. It's like demanding freedom of thought requires you to actually have a thought first.
Right. And this leads to a much deeper definition of freedom itself, doesn't it?
It does. Most people think freedom is just doing whatever you want as long as you don't hurt anyone.
The classic non-aggression principle.
But philosophically and cognitively, real freedom is actually the capacity to choose not to do something.
The choice of restraint.
Precisely. And if you apply that to expression, the ultimate act of freedom isn't just speaking your mind. It's having the ability to choose silence.
Or to choose your words carefully, moderation.
Exactly, that capacity for internal limitation. Some of the sources call it Irade. It's basically your will, your conscious self-control.
That completely flips the script. The focus shifts from, external government oppression to internal self-governance.
And that's why you see this pattern in societies that have been suppressed for a long time. When they finally get the right to speak, they often mistake it for a free-for-all.
A mandate to just speak without any discipline.
Yeah, and you get what's often described as a cacophony, just a chaotic mess of everyone screaming whatever they want, thinking that the loudest voice equals the most freedom.
And that chaos comes from confusing the lack of censorship with a mandate for carelessness.
So looking at the brain, how does this mechanism for self-control actually work?
This is where consciousness plays its role. Its fundamental purpose, really, is long-term projection.
A kind of utility calculator.
That's a great way to put it. It's constantly running the numbers. If I say this or if I do this, what's the long-term benefit versus the long-term harm?
For me and for my social group.
Exactly. And if you can run that calculation, that subtle cost-benefit analysis, then freedom of expression becomes a really meaningful tool. Without that internal governor, that Irade, it just collapses.
So the responsible mind isn't asking, am I allowed to say this?
No, it's asking, should I say this? Considering everything that might happen next. Which brings us right into the tension between my personal truth and, social necessity.
And what's so fascinating is how often just blurting out the truth is actually counterproductive.
To our goals as social animals, you mean?
Yeah. Think of a simple example. You visit a friend who's been in an accident. They look awful. Your brain might formulate a very accurate thought, wow, you look like you're about to die.
You definitely don't say that.
You restrain the impulse. Because that momentary release of an honest thought would do real harm.
Right, you run that quick calculation and realize the social bond, your friend's comfort, is way more valuable than just venting an observation.
So choosing not to say the harsh truth, using your Irade, is actually what strengthens the human connection.
But wait a minute. If we're consciously holding back the truth for social benefit, doesn't that imply that a certain level of, beneficial dishonesty is required for society to work?
It sounds cynical, but it's not. It's more like social engineering based on utility.
Okay.
Think about the phrase, how are you? The expected answer is fine, right? Even if it's not true.
Even if you're having the worst day of your life.
Exactly. Because society needs that quick, low-friction exchange to keep things moving. Answering with the brutal truth would derail the whole interaction.
It puts an emotional weight on someone who wasn't prepared for it.
And that's where choosing Irade over raw truth becomes crucial for the group to function.
So the truth needs a filter before it enters the social world. But what about the other argument? The one you always hear, I just need to vent. Cursing makes me feel better. That personal relief argument.
But you have to put that relief through a benefit test. Is that momentary relief actually beneficial if the problem doesn't go away?
And if the social backlash, getting punished, getting into a fight, being isolated, is worse than the feeling you vented.
Right. If your expression leads to you getting ostracized, then you misused your free will. It failed the long-term calculation.
That's why I like that maxim from the source material. Yerinde edilmiş küfür müzik gibidir.
A well-placed curse is like music.
Yeah. It implies that even something as raw as profanity needs to be applied thoughtfully to have any value. It has to serve a purpose beyond just emotional discharge.
Which brings us to the boundary, the line where freedom ends and, well, destructive action begins.
Let's talk about that hate speech. How do we draw that line with any kind of rigor?
Well, hate speech is fundamentally incompatible with free expression because its only goal is destruction.
It's not trying to build anything.
Nothing. It's expression aimed entirely at marginalizing, lowering, or even annihilating a group based on their identity. It's a useless attack, and no one should have the liberty to just harm another person for the sake of it.
This gets to the root of prejudice then. When you hear someone say, I'm not a racist, but I just don't like Arabs.
That second half of the sentence is the whole problem.
It's prejudice against an entire group, based on nothing but their identity.
And this inability to distinguish between a person and a group, or between, say, constructive dialogue and just abuse, it comes from a lack of critical development.
In cultures where real critical thinking isn't taught or valued.
Yes. In those places, critique illusory is often just mistaken for scolding or cursing, for just tearing someone down yarmek yapta kufretmek.
That's such a critical distinction. The point of good criticism is to improve something. But if all I can do is find faults, it just sounds like I'm attacking you.
Exactly. It takes average intelligence to spot a flaw. Anyone can point out the crack in the foundation.
Sure.
But genuine critical thinking requires you to see the crack and offer a way to fix it, a suggestion for improvement. That contribution takes what we could call a superior intelligence.
Not a higher IQ, necessarily, but a higher level of effort.
A higher level of engagement, yeah. It elevates the whole conversation above just noise.
And speaking of noise, there's that observation about the unqualified. How the people who can't even manage their own finances often have the loudest, most aggressive opinions on how to run the world.
It's that paradox, isn't it? Certainty without any accountability. It's easy to have radical ideas when you don't have to deal with the consequences.
The old saying about all the world-saving ideas being in barbershops and taxis.
That just adds to the noise, drowning out the people who've actually done the work.
So ideally, our internal irade should filter this noise.
Yeah.
But what happens when that fails on a mass scale? That's when external control censorship starts to look appealing.
And we have to admit, some external limits are just necessary. They protect the vulnerable.
Like?
The clearest example is censoring content that causes documented harm to a developing brain, like pornography, from being broadcast during hours when children are watching.
That's not really a philosophical argument. It's a public health one.
It's based on scientific analysis of developmental harm. But even there, you see powerful resistance.
The don't touch my personal liberty argument.
Right, where individual access is prioritized over a known, documented harm to young people. It's a huge dilemma.
So in a society that's governed by reason, the boundaries would be set by social consensus and clear data.
But when that consensus breaks down, when we can't even agree on what constitutes harm, then any external censorship just becomes coercion. It becomes tyranny.
Which forces us back to that fundamental distinction.
It forces us back to Irade, to will, versus external control. We have to see the difference between censorship, some authority stopping you, and Irade, or Ihtiyar, which means choice.
These are internal human abilities.
They're uniquely human. Animals don't have them, AI doesn't have them in this sense. And if we fail to use our own internal capacity for self-control,
we're basically inviting someone else to step in and do it for us.
And the weight of that choice is immense. It's captured perfectly in that maxim from Hazrat Ali. The word is yours until it leaves your mouth. Once it leaves, you belong to it.
Wow. The second you say it, you lose control.
You lose control of how it's heard, how it travels, what it does. You become its subject.
That puts so much pressure on that initial cognitive calculation. And if the whole system that's supposed to guide that calculation is broken,
then the problem gets exponentially worse. And this gets us to the breakdown of systemic intellectual guidance.
the risk that any authority given the power to restrict speech, even for good reasons, will inevitably become corrupt.
It's almost a historical certainty. Power centralizes, and it starts suppressing all liberties, not just the harmful ones.
The sources use the historical example of what happened in Turkey after the Republican Revolution. Can you walk us through that?
Well, it's a case study in how major institutions, the judiciary, academia, the military, can lose their way.
How so?
Instead of focusing on their main jobs, justice, education, defense, they became obsessed with regime defense.
So they put loyalty above competence.
Precisely. And in doing so, they basically destroyed their own internal guidance systems. If your universities are more concerned with defending the government than pursuing truth, they lose all moral authority.
So the rational unifying voices in society, what the source called the community's imam or guide, they go silent.
And you're left with an intellectual vacuum, which gets filled, again, by that cacophony, that chaotic noise that people mistake for freedom. There's no trusted guide anymore.
So in that kind of environment, for an individual who is trying to be thoughtful, what's the path forward?
The sources offer a kind of personal philosophy here. It suggests that you can express radical ideas even in a chaotic system, but you have to invest immense effort into your words.
You have to measure exactly where every craze is going to land.
Yes. It's the difference between, say, scattershot insults like those attributed to the writer Aziz Nesin, who is more of a literary provocateur in communication that is technically refined and deeply responsible.
It also means choosing your platform very, very carefully.
Context is everything. You can be incredibly blunt in a closed academic forum where everyone is prepared for rigorous debate.
Right.
But speaking on a platform like YouTube, which hits millions of unprepared people, that requires an incredible amount of caution. The level of Irade has to match the audience.
Because careless words, even from a brilliant person, can end a career.
Or force you into exile. When you broadcast without that filter, the consequences are real.
It sounds exhausting, though. This constant moment-to-moment effort to measure and refine every single word.
It is exhausting, but speech is precious. It requires labor, and that disciplined effort, it's what builds intellectual muscle. I think the source used the term kazgeliştir.
It develops muscle.
Yes, it develops our capacity for self-governance. We have to consciously choose to use our Irade to filter the chaos.
So the challenge we'll leave you with is this. If choosing restraint is the highest form of freedom, does the way our digital world is built, rewarding immediate, unfiltered reactions, force us into a choice between a silent, internal tyranny of self-censorship or a loud external one?
It's worth reflecting on that distinction. Are you being controlled by an external force, or are you choosing to govern yourself through conscious, disciplined self-control, one carefully measured word at a time? Because that internal choice, that's the true measure of our liberty.